Hello, I'm Dave Steinfeld, a Florida Bar board-certified business litigation attorney, which means I'm recognized as an expert in business litigation law. The video you're about to watch is from a talk I gave entitled A Primer on Business Litigation Law. This video introduces my background and a little bit about business litigation in Florida. The video is not intended to provide legal advice, but merely to give you background information on this area of the law. After you've watched the video, please take a look at other videos and articles on my website, www.davidsteinfeld.com. Thanks for watching. Hello everyone, I'm Dave Steinfeld. I'm a Florida Bar board-certified business litigation attorney, and what that means is that I'm recognized in Florida as an expert on business litigation law. Just to give you some of my background, I went to college at the University of Wisconsin on an Army ROTC scholarship in Madison, Wisconsin, and then prior to going on active duty, I went to the University of Miami Law School. My interest in going to the University of Miami was in their international law program, having lived overseas in Japan as an exchange student through Rotary before that. A lot of times people think that in the military, if you're not a JAG officer, if you're not a practicing attorney in the military, that you really don't have an opportunity to use your law degree. But one interesting story that I'd like to tell you about that occurred when I was on active duty, first as an intelligence officer in the Army, was on board a ship in the East China Sea, where I was posted as the intelligence officer in an Army operation. And as it turned out, one of my instructors at the University of Miami had been one of the co-authors on the UN Law of the Sea. And that came into great benefit on the ship when we turned out to be just a stone's throw away from North Korea, heading right toward their waters. And I was able to grab the Commodore of the destroyer group and the captain of the ship and educate them very quickly on what I knew about the UN Law of the Sea and the fact that the North Koreans didn't really subscribe to it, and we were able to turn around and get out of that area. After I completed my tour of duty as an intelligence officer, I was fortunate enough to transfer into the Army JAG Corps, where I practiced law as a criminal defense attorney for many, many years. After I was in the courtroom, I realized that I enjoyed being in the courtroom and standing in front of a group just like yourselves, or a group of panel members or jury, and arguing cases. When I got out of the service, when I finished my tour of duty, I knew I wanted to settle around the West Palm Beach area, so my wife and I picked this area north of West Palm Beach to settle, and I've been working in this area ever since. I've been out of the Army now for about 10 years or so, and I have used that opportunity to become board certified, as I mentioned earlier, in business litigation law. The process to become board certified as a business litigation attorney in Florida is that you have to prove yourself to the bar by doing a certain number of jury trials and non-jury trials within a specific time period. You also have to be peer reviewed by lawyers and judges, and you have to pass what's essentially a mid-career bar exam all about business litigation law. I've also been very fortunate enough to have been recognized by my peers and local judges and been awarded Martindale-Hubbell's highest recognition in peer review, which is called AV Preeminent. What I want to do now is give you a basic overview of some of the legal entities that we have in Florida and tell you a little bit about how those work. We have basically three kinds of business entities under Florida law. One is the corporation, the second is a limited liability company, and the third are partnerships. And there are various permutations of partnerships under Florida law. There are partnerships, limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, limited liability limited partnerships. They're all somewhat different, but they have been replaced to a great extent in practice by the limited liability company or the LLC. All three of these vehicles are statutorily authorized by the state of Florida. That means that there is a particular chapter of Florida law that controls these entities. For a corporation, for example, Chapter 607 of the Florida statutes is what controls all of the corporate law. And that's based on the Uniform Model Business Act, and to a large extent the interpretation of those laws come from New York law on corporations and Delaware. The LLC statute is found at Chapter 608 of Florida statutes, and that's a relatively newer statute. It's only been around for 12, 15 years or so, and it's really only come into play in the past decade. The partnership statutes are found at Chapter 620 of the Florida statutes. But as I mentioned earlier, the limited liability company has in large part replaced the partnership as the dominant vehicle for small local businesses because it's so simple to use. What do I mean by that? An LLC, as we call it, is somewhat of a hybrid. It operates like a partnership, but it looks like a corporation. It is recognized as a legal entity like a corporation. You can have members, which you'd call shareholders in a company. It can own property, it can transact business, similar to a partnership, but it operates in practice and under the law more like a corporation. There are less burdensome responsibilities for the owners and operators of an LLC as compared to a corporation. You don't have to have so many of the regular meetings and shareholder agreements. So the LLC, to a great extent, has replaced the corporation as the dominant player in the business market in Florida, simply because most of our corporations are small, closely held businesses, maybe one person, 2 or 3 people that, for lack of a better term, are in a partnership and have a small local business. One of the key issues that a lot of people step right over in creating a business entity, in creating their company, is the proper documentation. For a corporation, you'd have a shareholders agreement, articles of incorporation, other documents. For an LLC, we call that an operating agreement. And for a partnership, of course, a partnership agreement. Why is it important to have this documentation when you're forming the entity? It's because what happens down the road potentially, and it avoids a lot of problems later. It goes with the saying, an ounce of prevention. If you properly document your arrangement with your partners, for lack of a better term, in your business, it makes it a lot easier should something happen to one of those partners later on, or should the partners become at odds with one another, you can figure out what to do. The Florida Business Act, which is Chapter 607 for corporations, has been around for a long time, and as I mentioned, is modeled on the Model Business Corporations Act. It has a robust set of default provisions contained within it that if you don't have those types of provisions in your shareholders agreement or your articles of incorporation or other documents forming the corporation, you can look to the statute as a fallback and a backstop and utilize what's in those statutes. The LLC statutes, being much newer, have not come to that point yet. They are in development, and it'll be several more years before those default provisions are contained within that. And that makes it even more important, if you have an LLC, to have the proper documentation for the entity. Otherwise, you may wind up in a situation where the statutes don't provide any coverage. I'll give you an example of something that I witnessed recently. There were 2 people who formed a business just north of here, a little store. They signed a lease, they opened the business, and it was a retail store, and they were going to sell things. Not uncommon in Florida, not uncommon anywhere. At some certain point, these 2 partners couldn't get along anymore. One of the partners came to visit me and said, the other partner took everything out of the bank account, took the materials out of the store, and left and said, I'm taking everything and I'm going to do what I want. The person who came to see me said, what do I do? So instinctively I said, we need to take a look at your operating agreement for the LLC. Well, they didn't have one. They decided it would be a lot cheaper to simply go online and form the company and sort of do it yourself. The risk there is that when you do it yourself and you don't have the expertise that someone like I do has in forming these entities and mapping these things out, you wind up missing broad swaths of very, very important information. Now, those 2 people have signed a lease in their own names. They've got a problem between them with what do you do now with all the money that's been taken out of the bank account and all the merchandise? What about the suppliers who are now saying they want to be paid? What about the customers who have placed orders that are not going to be filled? And then you've got a landlord saying, someone owes me rent. The problem for those people becomes they're potentially on the hook personally because they didn't structure their business at all. They didn't, as we say, paper their business. They decided it would be a lot cheaper to not invest the time and money to sit down with a qualified attorney and do that. That's not to say that everyone needs to spend thousands of dollars right up front when you form a business. Many businesses can't afford to do that. But in the beginning stage of the business, when you plan out a business marketing plan, when you decide where you're going to locate your business and what type of business you're going to do, it becomes important to think through these issues and sit down, just as you would sit down with a CPA to do your books, to sit down with a qualified business attorney and understand what is out there and the potential pitfalls to properly structure your business.